So, we've covered some of the beautiful things that can happen with these technologies, and if we're responsible as humans and scientists of why we're creating them. But like any technology, it is neutral. It can be used for good or evil. Um, and there's a very dark side to neurotechnologies. And if you don't have the stomach for reality, this is the time to turn off the presentation. Um, and we're going to start talking about the weaponization of neurotechnologies. And here's the real issue, that there's a great downside. Humans put great value on their free will and autonomy. Um, and this blurs the lines quite a bit. So, we are going to begin by defining some neurotechnologies. I do not go through a full list of hacking the human brain, but I go through quite a few of them, and I want to define what neural weapons are to begin with, and then we'll talk about the positive uses and then the negative uses, for debate where humanity wants to go from here. Microwave spectrum hearing effect, and that what it actually does, if you ask Dr. Lin from the University of Chicago, is it heats the brain slightly, which causes it to expand, and then when the energy's gone, it contracts back. But this is done very quickly, um, and it vibrates the inner ear to then create the sense of sound. Um, I There have been no studies on how good that is for the brain. I assume it's a series of small concussions, but um, we'll remember this. It's an army tool that they pulled off their website called V2K, and you can't block it by plugging your ears. Uh, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but biomechanical methods such as bone conductance, there are headphones which will um, transmit sound through your bones. You know, as a child, you probably put a spoon or fork in your mouth and then flicked it, and it sounds very loud, like it's coming right out of your ears. We can do this for uh, with skin tissue that's close to the bone. All the bones are connected. There are ways to even heat the bone to make them vibrate, which then goes in the ear, and that's a biomechanical process for creating the perception of sound in your head. There's the electromagnetic biomechanical, and this was recently introduced by MIT, but it's been known far before that in other laboratories. And it's a laser light modulation with the atmospheric water vapor. So they modulate the laser the laser to heat the water vapors at that specific point, which comes across as sound vibrations to the human. Um, Now we're going to get into some more things that involve ethics, gene manipulation and insertion. And so in the public sector, we talk about blue light mice, where they've inserted a gene into the development of mice that is responsive to stimulation of the ionic channels of the neurons, and hence pulsing blue light, and that's the frequency that it's responsive to, alters the patterns of the mice brains. Um, and you know, we can do this in other ways. We've studied this for at least 60 years. These ionic gradient protein genes, we can do in other frequencies, or we can add magnetosensitizers. I don't know, let's use some examples, spliced into airborne viruses or vaccines. And, I know there'll be a lot of conspiracy about that, but this is the way we think in the secret government. Next slide. Now, I have to cover something called hypnosis because it's very related into how we do some more sophisticated methods of encrypted neural speech. And so the CIA had an old tool called REHIC, and it stood for radio frequency hypnotic intercerebral control. And really, let's bring it down to what maybe the audience has experienced of if you've ever been to a nightclub or seen a strobe light or heard what's called binaural beatings. If you look at your electroencephalograph over time, depending on the human, you will see the brain frequency match those stimuli. And I call it the firefly effect, and that's how we manipulate cultures. Everyone wants to belong, what is cool, fashionable, etc., accepted by society. It's a firefly effect, but we do it directly through neural entrainments to make people conform. I'll get into that more. Another effect you could experiment with, you close your eyes, you're in the dark, strong magnetic pulses stimulate a retinal response called the magnetic phosphenes effect, and you can see the flashing, you perceive it as a flashing light, even though there is no light. And that's just stimulating the retinal cells to emit a nerve response. The overall technique is often called frequency follows response, FFR, and it's important for a lot of, for example, in the U.S. Air Force in the 1970s and the Navy, they used it to align brain pathways for auto association of macro and micro circuits, but they were doing brain to brain and then trying some brain to computer interfacing to control machines, to read each other's minds. It was very basic research at that time. But alignment of the pathways of the major circuitry is important, and there are many more sophisticated techniques we use today. Now we're past the boring stuff. We get into the really interesting research that we're doing, and there is no way to separate this next method from and a gray area of secrecy. I don't know who's allowed to know about this, from cognitive modeling, the whole model of the mind. Yes, all the senses can be bypassed from the peripheral nerves. So let me go to the next slide. So in order to hack the mind or enslave it, the hack needs a known stimulus like echelon, and you'll have to look that up if you don't know. Knowing what you're listening to on radio or TV, or perhaps back to what I referred to with the Army, the microwave hearing effect, called V2K, to pipe specific speech into the inner ear's perception, which is turned into nerve impulses, grossly termed EEG, electroencephalograph, and magnetoencephalograph patterns, would also work as a starter. There are numerous ways this can be done. These are just a couple examples. Those impulses or neural responses are autocorrelated into a cognitive probability model specific to that person and influence pathways. The same effect can be achieved with direct human-to-human brain plasticity, but the technology is far beyond that now. Eventually, meanings of words are captured and so on until a nearly entire cognitive model is produced to some fidelity. These mind slips are utilized for many intel operations unbeknownst to them. Such uses can include mass shooters who heard voices with the greater agenda unbeknownst to them to take away guns and gun rights. The entire process takes from months to years, and not just all projects are successful, depending on the complexity of their minds and external stimulus and influences. A similar technique is used in hacking, copying artificial intelligence systems, except the stimulus inputs are different and output responses, obviously. This process of discovery of biological mind requires a bidirectional stimulus, recorded response for analysis, if not done directly to another human. Every small circuit correlated to the target's biospectrum is amplified by the energy of the synaptic neural mapped out pathways for the desired effect. So not much energy is required to amplify the biosignal, as it uses the body's own natural ion regenerative mechanisms to recharge them. At this point, it is basically synthetic telepathy and what the military calls low probability detection. Just verbal commands can be issued or the inner voice of the target deciphered while they read type their passwords or talk to other people. These methods are often redacted to Congress and the public for intel gathering. For a simple example, it's easy to pick out a heartbeat from the other summation of the autocorrelated biosignals, i.e., all the body, brain, electrical, and magnetic activity. Induction of higher level functions of the brain, such as hearing and other senses, are thereby achieved bypassing the peripheral nerves, but inducing the same perceived experience, useful for no-touch torture as an example, and that is useful for depatterning the brain and reprogramming. I don't nearly have enough time to get into details of the signal intelligence and psychological operations involved. But I assure you that it is incredibly brilliant. The most likely source of the VLF signals from ionospheric heaters, which cause extremely low frequency waves in the magnetosphere and are useful as part of the full spectrum electronic fence around the Earth, I can't talk about. It is unfortunate in order to scale this worldwide weapon system, artificial intelligent personality chatterbots, scripts are used with a twist of emotional neural pattern overlays to make them more engaging and realistic as a spiritual guide or a god, a devil, demon, alien presence, or blame other countries. But that's the psychological warfare operations divisions. Those identities are just false flag techniques, which again I don't have time to get into. But the interesting research is in the interconnectivity of multiple minds together and those hive mind groups connected to others in a much larger network, and how to influence them without their knowledge. They experience it as intuition or extra senses, which we used to call ESP, in the more subtle modes, as this following video will describe.
They had 3 monkeys with chips in their brain. Each of these monkeys can only see in 2 dimensions, 2D. But the monkeys together are rewarded with a treat, with some good food, if they can move a dot on the computer screen in 3D space to the right location. Well, each of these monkeys can't do it alone because they can only see 2D. They can't even move in 3D. But together, all three of those brains learn how to work together to consistently move the dot to the right 3D location. That finding is actually amazing. What it is telling us is that when multiple brains are wired together, they can perceive the world in a way that a single brain might not be able to do. They are collectively working as a single intelligence. Now, the monkeys aren't consciously aware that they are wired to other monkeys' brains. They don't have to know that. They are actually just getting the information and perceiving it intuitively.
So this is what they'll allow you to know in the civilian sector, and Duke University does a lot of these experiments on our nearest cousins. But when it's done to humans, and unfortunately we've done a lot of experiments on humans non-consensually since World War II, and they can I call it the empathy machine. They can feel each other's pains and hear each other's inner voice, and we rewire them in a lot of different ways that bypasses the normal peripheral senses, but the experiences are exactly the same for the computing unit called the brain. And this is how, we've overthrown the legal system, Congress, everything. And we can't talk about it. But I hope you think about the dangers for a true democracy this presents on a mass scale of social engineering. Just imagine subliminally controlling Congress or judges, etc. Again, I'm limited by time. This power cannot be entrusted in the hands of a secret government. We must work together to find solutions and treaties. But the first step is awareness, and huge apologies to the non-consensual, barbaric, and often deadly experiments performed on many around the world. Thank you for allowing me to speak.